Hello, welcome back to Theology with Mr. L. I'm Mr. L, Jason Liuzzi. If this is your first time checking out the channel, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hope you guys enjoy it. Today we're discussing some more questions put out by some of my students. And this question, it's a great question. It's a phenomenal question. It's probably one of my favorite questions to answer, and I hope I can answer it well. It's a question that I think has been nagging at people and theologians throughout pretty much all of human history in the church, right? And so hopefully I do it justice. We'll see how it goes. So the question is this: how can we have free will if God already knows what we're going to do? How can we have free will if God already knows what we're going to do? That's a great question. And there's actually a fancy term for this, and it's predestination. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Right? So even though you didn't know that when you wrote down the question, that's what we're talking about. It's the idea of predestination. And predestination, as you maybe hear in the word a little bit, predestination is simply this idea or this concept that everything has already been determined, right? That nothing you do or say really matters, in a lot of ways. That's how, and let me be clear, that's one interpretation of predestination, right? That, predestination can be interpreted not by Catholics as this idea that, it doesn't really matter, everything's already been determined, your life is what it is, and whatever. That's actually a wrong way of understanding predestination, right? It's not about that, God already created you and he already has figured everything out for you, so just do your best and, hopefully, it all works out. That's not how Catholics view it at all. We do have an understanding of predestination, but that's not how we would interpret it. So, like I said, predestination, wrongly interpreted, is this idea of basically kind of what you're getting at with your question and saying that, well, why does it matter if I have free will if God's already determined everything, right? That's a wrong way of understanding predestination. So we'll get into that. What we're going to do is we're actually going to read two different kind of paragraphs from the Catechism. Right? Remember, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, right, is this book given to us by the Church. It's not sacred scripture, right? It's given to us by the Church that helps us understand the Church's teachings on pretty much everything. But as I've said before in class, right, that this text is not written at a middle school level, so I will read it and then I'll kind of break it down and try to hopefully help you digest it a little bit more. So let's get into it. We're actually going to read first from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 600. Remember, the Catechism isn't organized by pages, but it's organized by paragraph, right? So paragraph 600, right? If you're going to go open up your Catechism and flip to page 600, you'd be reading something radically different. I don't even think there are 600 pages, so good luck with that. All right, so paragraph 600 says this: to God, all moments of time are present in their immediacy. When therefore he establishes his eternal plan of predestination, he includes in it each person's free response to his grace. All right, that's not the whole paragraph, but I want to stop there. All right, so there's a few really big things we have to break down here for a second. Some huge things. So when they use the term predestination, as Catholics, when we use that term, we're saying basically that God has a plan. There's something that we all know, that God, yes, he has a plan for you individually, right? But he has a master plan, right? That there is a big picture plan going on, right? That yes, God had a plan for Moses and for Moses to do certain things in his life, all right? But obviously Moses could never have understood the scope of his life, right? That, many, thousands of years later, we're still talking about Moses, and he's just this very incredibly important person that we know. So, yes, God has a plan for us, but our lives also are much bigger than ourselves, and as well as how he uses us and the rest of humanity kind of in this big picture way. So, yes, God has a plan for us, but more importantly, God has a plan for humanity, right? And that plan, right, so God's plan for all of humanity allows and takes into account our free response to it, right? That's what it says here in this particular paragraph. It says, he has an eternal plan of predestination. He includes in it each person's free response to his grace. Right? So yes, God has his big master plan, but he takes into account that we have this ability to choose and to make our own choices throughout it. Right? Now there's this really interesting thing. Right? So before I move on, I just want to be clear, right? So yes, God has a plan, but within that plan, God allows us to choose. Right? And God takes that into account. Right? That things don't just happen because he says they happen, right? But he has this plan, and we ultimately have to choose to cooperate and to work in it. And if we choose to reject it, then that's part of the plan, right? That he gives us that freedom, right? That free response, as the Catechism says, to work with and within or outside of that plan. So that's really an important kind of takeaway from that. The next thing is that God sees all things and all times simultaneously. And that's kind of this really mind-blowing thing, right? And that's the first line in this paragraph. It says, to God, all moments of time are present in their immediacy. So God sees past, present, and future all at once. Right? He works outside of time. Right? It's as if time is this line that kind of goes across. Right? We view time linearly, which is just a fancy way of saying, like, we view time as like there's a start and there's an end. Right? And it's flat. Right? It just kind of keeps moving along. Right? But God doesn't see the line, right? It's as if God's above it all, looking down on it and viewing everything all at once. Right? So God sees past, present, future all at once, which is absolutely mind-blowing to think about, which kind of leads into this whole deal. Well, then why does it matter? If God already knows what's going to happen, why does it matter what happens right now? Well, we'll get to that. So God sees all things, right? And so what does that mean? Well, it means that he has knowledge of all things. And this is where we're going to start making our distinction here, right? So the question says, if God already knows what we're going to do, right? So how can we have free will if God already knows what we're going to do? That's the question, right? So yes, God already knows what we're going to do. He knows that. He has knowledge of it. And that's really important. That's something that we need to understand, that yes, God has knowledge of what is, what was, and what will be. We're going to come back to that here in a second. So yes, God has knowledge of all of that. Does that matter? That's what we're going to get to. So, yes, God knows all things. The next thing, let's talk about free will. How can we have free will? Well, how do we have free will? Well, simply, we have free will because we have a rational soul, which is another way of saying that we have a human soul, right? The soul that God has given us is a rational human soul. And that rational soul allows us to think, it allows us to choose, it allows us to do all these other things, right? We call that intellect, thinking, and choosing free will. And then once again, I want to look at the Catechism again, and we're going to kind of break it down a little bit, get into it a little bit more, talk a little bit more about it. So I just want to read, this is from paragraph 1730. Paragraph 1730, right? And it says this: God created man, right? He's talking about humanity, right? That God created man, a rational being, conferring or giving him the dignity of a person who can imitate and control his own actions. These are in quotes now. God willed that man should be left in the hand of his own counsel, so that he might, on his own accord, seek his Creator and freely attain his full and blessed perfection by cleaving to him. That's a lot. We'll get into that. But it continues. Man is rational, and therefore, like God, this is the important part, he is created with free will and is master over his acts. Okay. So we have been given this free will, right? And what is free will? Free will is our God-given ability to choose. More specifically, we're given a free will so that we can choose God. That's why, right? God doesn't give us a free will so that we can do whatever we want. That's a wrong interpretation of freedom, right? As John Paul II tells us, that freedom is not in the ability, or is not consistent in the ability to do whatever we want, but freedom is the ability to choose what we ought or what we should. Okay, so free will is this gift given to us by God, right? To help us to choose him. That allows us to choose him. Doesn't help us, it allows us to choose him. And that's primarily why we've been given it. To choose God, to choose to love God, right? Because we can't choose to love God if we can't make that choice on our own. You can't force someone to love. You can't force love and have it be true, genuine love. So God created us with free will so that we could choose to love God. So without free will, there's no choosing God. So God gives us a free will. And the crazy thing about this free will, right, is that God cannot influence our free will. Right? That he cannot alter or take possession of us and prevent us from actually making a choice, right? As it says in the Catechism, we are master over our actions, meaning that we're in control of our actions. That God doesn't force us to do anything, that we have to choose. So, we have a free will. And free will is our ability to choose God or to reject him. God knows everything that is, will be, and was. Okay. Now, this is kind of where everything is just put together here. Knowledge of something does not affect the action, right? So knowledge and free will are these two different things entirely, right? That you have knowledge that I am sitting here in front of you and doing this thing. You can see that, right? You can acknowledge that. You have this ability to know that, all right? But in the same way, I could get up and I could leave, right? I mean, you have knowledge of me sitting here trying to teach you, but it doesn't mean that you have control over what I say and do. Now, just because God knows everything, right, just because God knows what was, what is, and what will be, doesn't mean he forces you to do any of it. And that's what's really important. We have a free will so that we can choose God. And God, yes, God knows what we're going to do, but he doesn't force us or make us do it. We have to make those choices, right? God doesn't create anyone to go to hell. In fact, it's God's will for all of us to go to heaven, right? That every single human being on this earth is created to be united with God in heaven for all eternity. That's his desire, and that's his plan for everyone. Now, we have the ability to reject that, right? And that's kind of where free will and all this comes in, right? That we have the ability to reject God's plan for us. Now, yes, God's plan for us is to prosper, and God's plan for us is really the greatest possible plan that we could ever have for us and that we could ever possibly imagine. And we have the ability to choose that or to reject that. And yes, God knows what's going to happen, but it's still up to us to choose kind of what happens, right? God doesn't make us do anything, right? Because if he made us do what he wanted us to do, then he wouldn't really be a loving God. And we wouldn't be able to really respond to him with love. So I want to leave you with this, right? That yes, God knows everything, but it's still up to us to choose God. Which is why every single day we should be striving to be choosing God. Every single day we should be striving to know him more, to love him more. We should be seeking him out in prayer. Right, so just to kind of wrap all this up, to put it practically right, yes, you have a free will, and your free will is guided by your conscience. It's guided by your habits, okay? So develop some good habits, develop some habits of prayer, right? Develop a greater knowledge and a greater sense of virtue in your life. Cultivate that, especially as we're home and we're just kind of stuck in one place. Really be striving every single day to grow in greater holiness. And you have all the time in the world. I suspect that you're probably spending a lot of time watching YouTube or playing video games or, on social media or doing whatever, watching Netflix, right? What if you took 5, 10, 15 minutes of that time and devoted it to prayer? That's not even necessarily an episode of something. That's less than an episode of something, potentially. So as I've kind of said throughout many of these videos, make sure you're praying, make sure you're drawing closer to the Lord, and really make sure that you're allowing yourself to grow in greater holiness during this time, because this is a great opportunity for you to do that. It's a great opportunity for you to go to daily Mass, right? You could go to Mass every single day. You could go, and most daily Masses that people are streaming are 30 minutes long maybe, right? You know, these are just little things that we can be doing in our life to grow in greater holiness. I just want to challenge you with that, right? That if you grow in greater holiness, then your free will and your plan and your desire will be the same as God's for you. And then we don't have to worry about things like, well, what does it matter what I do? Because it's not really the right way of thinking of it, but it's thinking of it as, I get the privilege and the honor of following God's plan for me. So thank you guys. I hope you've enjoyed. This has been Theology with Mr. L. I'm Mr. L. See you later. Have a good one. Cheers.